I think we're live. Okay. Welcome to the Security Weekly Unlocked and very first Unlocked Diversity panel. And I'm Doug White. I'm the host of Security Weekly News. All the hosts had been talking about having a group to discuss diversity. So we had been talking about this for like a while, actually sort of off camera. And so here we are. The panel today is a really great group of cyber professionals, and I'm going to introduce them all. And I promise I will, for me, it will be a minimal talking experience. I'll try. Anybody who knows me knows that's going to be probably a lie, but I will try to let everybody else talk. So alphabetically, Ladrina Chern is the champion for security in the digital forensics and cybersecurity industry. Ladrina serves as principal security advocate at Cyber Reason, where she drives innovation and development of best practices related to cybersecurity standards and policy. Ladrina is also a researcher at the Technology and Social Change Project at Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center, where she works to frame technology in the public discourse about the reliability of information online. That sounds challenging. Gabe Gumbs has a deep-rooted passion for technology, information security, and problem solving. Gabe is the Chief Innovation Officer of Spirion and a leader in rapid identification and protection of sensitive data. Gabe is spearheading Spirion's vision for data privacy in the next decade and beyond. And Mandy Logan has a passion for improvement, developing tech, communication, and sustainable expansion of accessibility. Mandy is an ambassador for mental health hackers. She speaks regularly at cons and is the founder of Hacker Stand-Up Comedy. Mandy is a disabled minority newcomer to InfoSec, autistic, and a survivor of strokes. I am Doug White. I can't compete with all those credentials, but I am the host of Security Weekly News. I have been involved in this business for a long time, since the 1970s, and I am the chair of cybersecurity and networking at Roger Williams University. My first job was writing Fortran 2 code as a high school intern. And so in 1977, when I got in the field, just to tell you a little diversity thing here, the room that I walked into in 1977 looked about like probably most every other room in engineering and computer science in 1977. A bunch of middle-aged white guys in starched white shirts with neckties and that occasional rebel that had a bow tie on. But that, it was, did I say white guys? Yeah. I mean, it's not that there weren't any women or minorities or other, marginalized groups working in tech, but they didn't get in the pictures and they didn't get the promotions. And there weren't a lot of people there. And where I worked, there was literally just all white engineering guys. But one of my heroes was always Grace Hopper. And Grace reminded me of my grandmother, if my grandmother had been a programmer and like that. But Grace worked in an all-male world, and she pretty much made it happen despite the fact that she was the only woman on the ship. She was the only woman in the room. She was the only person sitting there. So basically, with all that said, I think one of the biggest things in my life that made me stop and think about diversity was one time I missed a train in China. And I ended up in the wrong bus station in Nanjing, China, and I was trying to use a payphone. And from the old days when you didn't have a cell phone and you were trying to use a payphone and it was written in Chinese, so you're trying to translate. Nanjing is a city of about 12 million people. And the week I was there, I later found that there were 82 Westerners in Nanjing. It was not a place that Western people went. And of all those Westerners, there was probably 80 white people in the whole city. I was trying to use a payphone, and I had to go up on this little podium, and I was trying to figure it all out, and it got quiet in this very crowded bus station. And I turned around to see why it got quiet, and I realized that every single person, literally, in that place was looking at me because they were wondering, who is this guy, and what is he doing here? And there was no hostility in it. There was nothing like that. But what it made me realize was that that's a tough room. And I realized that when people walk into those rooms that everyone is staring and wondering, why are you here? It's got to be an uncomfortable feeling that a lot of people of color and women have been facing for a long, long time in this industry. Even if nobody meant any harm, it's still a tough situation. So like a lot of tech segments in the industry, cyber has been male. It has been often socially challenged males running around. And when I taught computer programming for years, I rarely ever had female students or students of color in those classes. And so I think my first question, and I'm going to do these in order, and just I'm going to call on everybody, just sort of kind of keep it going. But my first question for everybody is, how bad is the diversity problem in the cyber industry really? I mean, is it like 1950s programming shop bad, or have we made some progress? And I'm gonna call on everybody in different orders. So I'm gonna ask Ladrina to answer this first.
Awesome. So I think it's something that we're starting to acknowledge today, just in 2020, and talk about. And I think that while we've made some improvements in the last few decades, it's still something that we need to actively work on to get better. I'll share two quick stories about reflecting on when I got into the institute. And only today, I'm really realizing in hindsight, which is back in the late 90s when I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, getting into tech in the first .com boom. I was reading the Hacker Dictionary, this old copy of this, big tome of the tech industry that came out then. In the back of the Hacker Dictionary, there's this description of it's like random J hacker. And it talks about how this is your typical Caucasian male, nerdy, long-haired kind of guy. And I was like, wow, that was not that long ago that we were talking about that as, not the 70s like you introduced, Doug, but within a decade or two that was the assumption of who's in tech. And I think that carries a lot of weight today. I'll just share one more story about where I've come from in reflection, which is at that time, I was somebody who was interested in tech. I had just taken in high school my AP computer science exam. And I recently looked back on statistics for how many students who were like me took that exam the same year. And when you look at women of my age who were considered underrepresented minorities, the College Board wasn't even tracking that statistic when I took the exam. So, while I think we've made improvements from the 70s and from the 90s, we still have a long way to go. And I think it's conversations like this that can help us acknowledge that and make further change.
Cool. Gabe, I'll let you go next on this one. Same question.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the InfoSec community isn't somehow special in this regard, although I would agree with everything that was just said. I don't know if we've really gotten better per se, which is really just a reflection of, if I look at it as a percentage of representation, and I certainly can speak anecdotally, but if I go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have it at roughly 3% of Black African Americans that make up cybersecurity analysts within the United States. If I were to stretch it out from the analyst level, which are largely kind of entry level info technicians, and as I start making my way into to further into the depths of info tech, I'd hazard a guess that 3% starts drastically decreasing. Even more so when I look around the executive tables across the cybersecurity world. I would argue that it certainly is not well represented. I would equally argue that in terms of getting better, I think cybersecurity as a whole can be a bit of an echo chamber, not just in race relations, but in a lot of things we do. And so sometimes we exacerbate that problem onto ourselves.
And thank you. And Mandy, I'll let you finish this one.
Okay, so I come to the tech and cybersecurity side of it, especially just in the last few years. And coming in as a disabled female that was completely new to the industry, and going on what I've been able to find as far as female representation in information security, from my understanding, generally averages around low 20% of the overall. And this is fascinating and incredibly encouraging to me, because my prior industry was construction engineering, which was 3% female. Forget about minorities or anybody else. It was 3% female and not really improving in a substantive way. But coming into InfoSec and being around biohacking and AI professionals and speaking consistently, because I come at it more from a neurological standpoint into technology and then into cybersec, I find that it's far more encouraging and changing more rapidly than I see in other industries or than I experienced in the industries that I was in consistently previously. So I find it that there's absolutely room for improvement. There is constant room for greater inclusion and for greater diversity. And yet I've got to say that the first few times even that I went to conferences, I personally was actually really relieved and encouraged because it was wildly different from my prior experiences being at conferences in construction engineering.
Cool. Thanks. I'm going to let that lead into another question, though, about this, which is, one of the issues for me about all this is it's always a kind of chicken and egg problem. I mean, I have been involved in this whole thing from many different perspectives for a long, long time, and I've been to the meetings, I've been to the trainings. I've been at universities that's dropped a whole bunch of money on billboards and signs that said, we are committed to excellence. And and it was a room full of white people saying, we're committed to diversity, we're committed to excellence through diversity, and I mean, and I don't think they were being insincere. I don't think it was some kind of lip service, secret, problem. But one of the problems was, for me, this chicken and egg problem was somebody's always going to have to be brave enough to be that first person to walk onto the quad amidst a majority and be that first person. So that I was calling that like the Jackie Robinson and Grace Hopper problem. I mean, those people, Jackie Robinson walked into a baseball stadium full of racists who were screaming things and throwing things at him, and he stuck it out, and I mean, and he won that fight. Grace Hopper walked into those rooms in the Navy, which I worked for the Navy, and I mean, it was, a room full of white guys who were saying, why is there a woman here? Why is there a woman on this boat? That is not acceptable. And those things have changed, but I think in order to change it, it's really tough to get average people, not extraordinary people like Jackie Robinson or Grace Hopper, but it's tough to get average people to leap into these majority-minority situations. So I'm going to let Mandy start on that one and say, so how do we do that? How do we get more people to come in the door so that we get more people on the other side of that?
First and foremost, I think the largest factor that works against InfoSec is that people don't even know it exists across the board. People do not even realize that it's an option or that it is out there, let alone it being a minority person or someone who does not have access to technology growing up or is female and not comfortable in this situation. So one part of it is simply helping people on the whole to understand that cybersecurity exists. I've had conversations with vocational rehabilitation counselors. These are PhD and master's level counselors whose entire existence is to help disabled people to re-enter the workforce, or for people who are unemployed to get retrained and enter into the workforce. And I myself was going through this. I was talking to them because I needed to be able to do this. And when I said I want to pursue cybersecurity and biohacking, neurological integration of technology, just stop at cybersecurity, I had to bring in documentation to the vocational rehabilitation specialists that cybersecurity exists and that it was a viable like a career path, and to even understand that there was schooling available for it. So when you're facing that kind of odds of having even established career placement professionals understand that it's out there, that to me is the biggest thing, to start getting average people to know that it exists. And the next thing I would say is this is something that every single person who works in IT or networking or systems or cybersec in any way, that quit acting like what you are doing is brain surgery. Quit giving off the idea that what you are doing is so technical and so advanced that it creates a complete block and this chasm that people don't see themselves being able to get over to enter the industry.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, I like that. Ladrina, same question. I mean, how do you get more people in the front door so that you get more people out on the field at the back end?
Absolutely. So this is something that I've personally been working on in the past year, aside from some of my own experience, which I've started to share a little bit of. One other piece of the industry I've been involved in is in cybersecurity education. So I do this through SANS Institute, and when I say that, I'm talking about adult continuing professional education. But I think one thing I've been trying to do is reinforce for people who start to dip their toe in. I don't know about people crossing the threshold or like wanting to open the door, but what I want to do and what I feel empowered to do is when somebody opens the door to take that step into the industry, I want to reinforce that they are welcome and that we can help them succeed. So in the space of this education framework, I've been working with a lot of our instructors to think about the language we use on a daily basis. And this is what I've really been championing, especially this year, is thinking about terms like master and slave, thinking about terms like blacklist and whitelist. And if you've been in the tech industry a long time, these are common terms. We use them in many different areas. But if you're somebody who's new to the industry, or if you've been in the industry and you just stop to think for a few seconds about why that term exists and what it means, why are we using a term like whitelist to mean something that's good and allowed in your network, and blacklist to be the inverse? So I think that one thing that I can do, and maybe a lot of people listening can do, is think about the reinforcing things we can do to really confirm that people belong and that they're welcome. And once we confirm that you belong and you're welcome, and our language and our everyday actions also confirm that, then we can help them further along in their journey.
I do think a lot of times even people that mean well, I've certainly done it myself, are treating people differently because they're different. They're in a minority or whatever. And I think we need to all be aware of that as well, because it is something where you think, oh, did I behave differently because this person walked in the room? And then that just picked up on immediately. And, and we have all done that. I know I've done that. I know that I've been in corporate environments where a female was sitting there in the room and people started acting differently in that circumstance. And so I like that welcoming. I think that's, for the university, that's certainly something they've had to work on, is how do we make sure people feel comfortable walking around this campus when they're the only person who is that, group or whatever. Gabe, I'll let you take a shot.
Oh, so many great points there. So many great points. And then Mandy, there's no shortage of times I've beat up on my own industry to point out that we do think that the things that we do are somehow so esoteric and dark cloaked, and it's not rocket surgery. I mean, yes, there's a lot of room for high intelligence to be applied to a lot of our problems, but there's so many problems that don't require that level of just extreme intellectualism to approach at any given day. But something else was also touched on that I think is worth pulling the thread on even more, is this problem starts well before we get to the point where folks are entering into the workforce, right? And you mentioned the access of an understanding that it is a possible career path. I've encountered that myself, where I've gone to local schools in the Bronx years ago and given talks at career day to explain such things. But access to technology is a huge one. Throw around some more statistics as well too, because I love the number. So in the US alone, we've got more than 14 million people that have no internet access at all, 25 million of which have no access to reliable broadband. And that disproportionately affects poor neighborhoods, which, again, unsurprisingly, as we know from looking at the hard data, is largely minority communities. And I don't want to distract away from the rural problems there as well, because it certainly exists. But as a percentage of the whole, we see these problems represented more in high density urban areas. In New York City, 27% of households lack broadband altogether. That's 730,000 people. Another 17% of those, 533,000 people, have no computer at all in the home. It is impossible to see a path to this career when you do not have the tools to even access it.
I agree. One of the things I saw that, again, if you ever want to start feeling privileged, you have to start looking around you and seeing exactly how privileged you are. When the pandemic started, my daughter, who's very aware of all such things, was basically smacking me around because it was like, just go home and work, like, just, and she was like, and for my students, I was like, just go home and work, and my daughter's like, yeah, I have my own computer, I have my own room, I have, but there were all these students who struggled with this because they got sent home to a one bedroom apartment in Manhattan with three siblings who all needed to share the non-existent one computer that they had. Because I had a friend who was telling me that, and he was like, we have one computer, and I have three children, and we were told all my children should be sharing this computer all day, every day, and we don't know exactly what to do. And he was a musician, and he was like, I don't have, and so we were trying to help them out. What do you, so as a follow-on question to that, what do you think companies should be doing to try to encourage? Obviously, they have a vested interest in this on the back end. So how could organizations, what kind of things could they do to make these things start to happen, say, for middle school and high school kids who don't have these kind of opportunities? Because I know that exists all too often. And I'll let Gabe go first on that one, since he's been going last. So,
Step one, find out if it's a problem. Step one is literally ask, inquire, understand the people that work for you and their own situations. Do you know what it is they're facing? Before you can find out, so I talk about this a lot in the technology side of my world, but spend more time in problem space than you do in solution space. I don't know that we need to jump right to, let's everyone go dig out the spare machine they have in the room. Yes, that would be helpful, but step one is spend a little bit more time in problem space. And we're not spending any time in problem space. And those organizations could spend some time in that problem space, speaking to their own employees, understanding what challenges that they have at home, because it is equally false to simply assume that, in my organization, that every single one of our families has access to those things.
and I think that makes such a huge difference, is just the fact, especially in our field, because if you, at least my observation has been, kids that have computers and access to after school activities and all these kind of things when they're 13 years old have a lot more opportunities when it comes time to go to college, and on and on and on. Because I know I had access to that. When I was 13, I went to my dad and I said, I either want to be a guitar player or a computer programmer. And, I had the advantage of having, a parent who immediately stepped in, made a few phone calls. Next thing I know, I'm an intern at a muffler company where they had a programming shop. It's just like, okay, but not everybody has, but it's hard to see that kind of stuff. Ladrina, what do you think about companies? What can they do? How do we get people involved?
I really want to echo what Gabe mentioned earlier, which is, you need to look at your own organization and find out what the issues are. And, I think we're having a couple different conversations right now. We're talking about, how do we make change in the industry? How do we impact our pipeline, and how do we start with young people having access to computers and having access to the internet? But, you need to ask and find out what's going on in your own organization and your own communities. And the word that comes to mind is intersectionality. A lot of things that Gabe was mentioning, when we talk about access to computers, we talk about access to the internet, people who have different resources available to them, and maybe those resources are parents who can help you navigate these professional careers or not. There's this intersectionality of factors that really compounds itself. And you need to figure out what are those issues and how do you start to address the whole picture? Because, just providing a computer might not be enough in some of these cases. But really stepping back, looking at the whole picture, and looking at those people and those organizations who are within arm's reach. Just to start, even in your own house, and ask what's going on.
I agree with that, and I certainly that idea of just handing out things. I saw this, and again, it was a company. I won't even mention the name, but it was a long time ago. It was a company that meant well, and they had provided a great deal of equipment. I mean, a lot of equipment to some schools that didn't have access to very many things, but they didn't provide anything else. They just backed a truck up and unloaded a lot of boxes, and it was super cool, awesome. And this person I knew called me and said, "Can you come down here and give us some idea what we ought to be doing?" And but it was just like, okay, you have a lot of equipment here, but there's a lot of issues that go along with this. So I think that's very right on the money. With we have to figure out what the real problem is and how to really solve it. And Mandy, so this is I wanted to ask you this question. There's a lot of people that are challenged with many more things than just being a minority or being financially disadvantaged or whatever. How do we reach into those communities? Because that is a massively greater challenge to me. I mean, there's so much diversity in that community of people who have both physical challenges to overcome, maybe mental challenges to overcome. How do we reach into those communities? I mean, none of us have training in this, and I have students that have all kinds of different challenges. And I don't have training in that. I'm a programmer. And so what do we need to be doing there? I mean, because I feel for it, but I'll have a student come in and say, I have this. And I'm like, oh, I don't even know what that is, and I have no idea how I'm supposed to deal. I mean, we have, obviously the university has all kinds of resources for that, but just as an individual, it's a huge challenge for me.
Well, if you'll allow me, there's several areas that we can go into on that because and interestingly enough, it kind of overlaps with also what I would say to do for middle schoolers and high schoolers to gain access in rural areas. And it would be there's two parts, if you're talking about the organization or as an individual. As an individual, I would say that when someone comes and if they are willing and able, and it has been diagnosed, and they can tell you, hey, I am dyslexic, believe them. If they say, I have crippling migraines, I need to work from home, believe them. When they say these things, because the mass majority of people are having to overcome a lot of shame and guilt and embarrassment and absolute fear that they will lose out on any opportunity that could be if they say, hey, I have been injured, or I have this chronic illness, or I have this learning disability. Believe them when they bring it up. It is generally not used as some device in order to gain a leg up or to get unreasonable accommodations. There will always be outliers. We have moochers. That's just how it is, but for the most part, then the other part is really beginning to reflect and understand that within the disabled or differently abled or autistic communities or people facing mental health challenges, approach it with that every person within the community is more like Stephen Hawking than like a degenerate on the street that just doesn't want to do anything. Because first off, you don't know that. You don't know that about that person. Next, start thinking about the ingenuity that it takes to get through life with mental disabilities, instability, learning disabilities, dyslexia, whatever else it may be, and dealing with chronic illness. And if you're going to start looking at giving opportunity and taking advantage of the good things that disabled and yet they're not the same, but to me, coming from both, like it's also very similar to people who do not have access to technology off the bat. Yeah, dropping a computer on them, okay, that's great, but that doesn't help anything. So it would take I would recommend a much more physical approach of actually going to the areas where you are more likely to find disabled individuals and start talking, start putting up physical posters. Like this might be in the Social Security office. It might be, if you're in a rural area, go and talk to the police departments, to ROTC, to the people that a lot of disadvantaged and differently abled people end up in these other types of programs. Talk to those administrators, help them start becoming aware that there is a channel toward this type of career. And with disabled people, there's other things like that. See, myself, I've had to go through, being in full power chairs, to manual chairs, to going on stage to give talks and tech presentations using a walker. I have a service animal. There are simple physical things that are huge barriers, such as having really thick carpet. If you have really thick carpet when I'm in my manual chair, it absolutely exhausts me and makes it nearly impossible for me to do anything else. So I'm not saying everybody go out and change your hardwood floors. I'm saying that sometimes the things that are challenging to a person have absolutely nothing to do with mental acuity or with tenacity and ability to get through it. And then there was one other thing I was going to say about using with differently abled people. There's a lot of things to take simple things, such like if your company uses Zoom, consider automatically integrating Otter AI so that all of your Zoom meetings are captioned. Consider making sure that all of your materials for your company are able to be read by a screen reader, or even better than that, just provide them in audio files so that people, whether it's like me, who still has to really monitor, I can only use the screens about 2 hours a day. I can take in the information auditorily. That helps many people that have learning disabilities. That also is how a lot of people that even aren't disabled in any nature, they are used to learning by podcasts or while they're driving or listening. So looking at it from a way that makes it more accessible and working with things, creating programs. One thing I would say is if you're talking with a person who is disabled and currently has lived on Social Security disability, or they are dependent on having access to health care, set up programs where they work for you and make whatever is allowed for them to still be able to keep their disability as an interim training program, as an internship. They can keep their medical access and perhaps food stamps, other things they need, and you get the benefit of having a person who cannot wait to learn and to do more and eventually progress and see a path out of being on disability.
Cool. I think that's a great idea. I hadn't really thought about that. I don't think we do very much of that in terms of like trying to get, to people in middle school and high school and things like that either, just to try to figure out how do we transition to a career. I mean, it's easy to talk about. It's a really hard thing to do. One of the things I think I learned since 2016, and I'm going to try not to get into politics too much, but 2016 made me go back, and I thought we had made progress on a lot of these issues, and 2016 made me realize that we hadn't. And I saw the systemic racism sort of come racing back to the surface, and I realized it wasn't that it was gone, it just was hidden more for a while. And I think that the last 4 years probably taught me that there's a lot of hostility, apparently based on race and sex and sexuality and gender and disability and whatever kind of challenge. And so my question, which is kind of, I think really all of these questions are in the same light, but do you think we're really making any progress? I mean, I know we've sort of answered this before, but I mean, are we really making any progress, or is it just a kind of light foam on top of a bigger cesspool of problem? And we're, all these things we keep trying to do aren't really making real change there. So I'll let Mandy go first on this one. She ain't got to go first yet, so I'll let this one over to you.
Personally, I would say yes, there is progress being made. It may not be exponential at this point. There is progress being made. And I'm speaking more from the hacker side and from the more informal, not from the extreme corporate structure or from the higher education viewpoint, but from the hacker side and from community infosec speaking with thousands of people. I see a progress toward people feeling very much more comfortable to express who and what they are, and then becoming even proud and happy to figure out their ways to still be successful and go after their goals.
I agree very much. Gabe.
I'm going to agree with progress. Even small progress is progress, but I would actually say that it's a little bit more than small. And back to my point about spending more time in problem space, we're talking about the problem a whole lot more than we were before, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And that in and of itself is a significant amount of progress. Some of the conversations are not as simple as others, but there's conversation. If nothing else can be looked at as a significant bit of progress over the last 4 years, is even to the point that you made, you have some recognition of your own that maybe what I thought was reality might not be the same across the spectrum. So for me, at an absolute minimum, the conversation at the levels we're having it across many different people and facets of communities and socioeconomics, etc. That's solid progress. It will not nothing will change if we don't discuss it. That's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think like just when I learned about like microaggressions and stuff, I remember people talking to me about that, and I was like, so I mean, sometimes people mean well and they can change, and you learn about things like that and say, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to say that anymore or whatever. Even things that people don't really think are bad. And they are, and it's so interesting when you start to hear that from other people's perspective, which is another chicken and egg problem, because when there are people with different viewpoints and different perspectives, you start to hear different viewpoints and different perspectives, and a lot of people that I know are not evil people, and when they started hearing people go, that's just really hurtful to me. And it was somebody they respected, like, wow, I had no idea. I'm not gonna say that anymore. And so hopefully that can change. Ladrina, you want to take a shot at this one?
Yeah, I think we are making progress, and that's evidenced by everybody who's tuning into this conversation right now, right? But we also have to acknowledge that there are some people who might never tune in, who aren't willing to tune in and spend the time thinking about these issues. So for those of us who are thinking about it, who are having conversations, I think the question now becomes, what's the next step? Is it spreading that message to the people who haven't been willing to listen and think about these things? Is it making sure that these conversations we're having informally as a community, that they're being heard and acted upon by our board and by our C-suite? And I think that's really what comes next for many of us, is what happens when you have that person in the leadership position who needs to make a decision based on hiring, and you have somebody who comes from a traditional, on paper, I don't know if we can talk about traditional experiences in security, but, there are still people who come up through a college system and maybe a more conventional background, versus somebody who comes from a non-traditional background. What do you do with those two people when you're looking at them on paper? And how do you make that decision to lean in to the kinds of diversity, many kinds of diversity that we've been talking about today? And what do you do when you're in that business decision? So we're making progress. We're having this conversation, and I guess the question for me is, what comes next?
Well, and so I will ask you the question. You were I was going to let you take this one first, so it's perfect timing. My final question on this was if you could do one thing right now. I mean, you just waved a magic wand and do something to the cyber industry related to diversity. What would it be? And I'll let Ladrina take the lead on it. So you were just leading into that.
Oh yeah, I think I would say as an industry, continue to be open to people who don't come from what I just described as potentially a typical career path through, as a young person going up through a college system, getting a technical degree, going into the industry, whether that person is somebody who is a late career changer, whether that person has other things that other experiences they've had in their lives. We've seen study after study, and I think McKinsey is the seminal one that always gets quoted, is that our businesses are stronger and more profitable when we bring diversity to the table. So again, it comes down to these hiring and promotion decisions. And can you figure out how somebody who has more diverse experiences can add to your company? And I think consideration of that is what I would encourage.
I completely agree. I've never seen that fail. So, I mean, I think that's a great idea. And I've always wanted that. Gabe, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would change the funding models. So if you look at how cybersecurity companies are largely backed and funded, it's more or less all of the same. There are roughly two different funding models at the core of it, and what that does is it tends to reinforce similar behaviors and patterns in terms of who we choose to lead these businesses. And so as they start at their core, as they are beginning their journey to become a company, but at the very startup phase, you already begin reinforcing cultures and lack of diversity from the start, so that by the time it becomes a much larger organization, you're now trying to back diversity into it. So I turn some of the funding models and access to capital on its head.
Excellent. And Mandy?
I would actually start a nationwide, very methodical campaign to reach out to each and every vocational rehabilitation counselor and center that focuses on job entry and vocational rehabilitation, and then also to centers for independent living. Every area throughout the U.S. is assigned to a center for independent living, and these centers are where disabled or newly injured people can access resources and information for living with disability and then moving beyond it. And then I would have the campaign go directly into rural areas, into community centers, libraries, and speaking with the local police department, and create more of an awareness of that the industry exists at all.
I really like this thing about the industry not existing, because I've seen that myself, just in terms of government agencies and things that are just now starting to learn. I mean to be fair, when did this industry even start? I mean, it's like in the last 2 decades. Literally. I mean, I was teaching classes in Colorado, and I called the program I started. It was called like Hacking 101 or something like that, and that got a bunch of bad press. But I mean, the idea of that, there was the term cybersecurity didn't even exist, and people were just starting to think about these things in the 90s and so forth. Well, I do want to thank Ladrina Chern from Cyber Reason and Harvard, Gabe Gumbs from Spirion, and Mandy Logan from Mental Health Hackers et al. For being panelists on this session, which could probably have been 2 or 3 hours long, and maybe could be 20 or 30 hours. We could do a whole course, right? And we could have a weekly on it. But I really appreciate you being panelists. I want to thank all the people that were watching this. Please keep looking for these kind of things. I think we need to talk about this more. I hope we can keep talking about it regularly. And if you want to see more content like this from Security Weekly, please let us know. And I'm Doug White for Security Weekly News. Thanks for joining us on this panel, and have a great day.
Thank you, Doug, and everybody.
Thanks, folks.